How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to try something new. I have made a compilation of all the previous videos in the Mantine course playlist into one simple video format. And if you do enjoy this type of format, be sure to like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into this course. Alright, so to get started installing this library, I went ahead and opened up the documentation for this. The link to this is in the description below, so go ahead and open that up. And then the first thing we're going to see is this Get Started button. Go ahead and click that. And then it's going to take us to a page where it's going to ask us to choose all of our packages. The first two are already checked since they are mandatory. The left one right here is for the hooks, and the one on the right is for all the core components, inputs, buttons, overlays, etc. The next six aren't mandatory, but I'm still going to go ahead and install them. Next, it's going to ask us to get started with. We want to choose Create React App since we are creating a TypeScript React app. And I'm going to click on this clipboard that says Copy Code. And then I'm going to go into my code editor of choice, and then I'm just going to go ahead and paste that into my terminal. Before I press enter, I'm going to change my app name to be Mantine Course. You can change it to whatever you want. And I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to let it work its magic. Alright, now that the app is installed, now we gotta install the dependencies. So I'm going back into the documentation, and underneath install dependencies, since I'm going to be working in NPM, I'm going to go ahead and just copy this code right here. If you're working with Yarn, you're going to have to click on this one. So I'm going to paste it right here, but before I press enter, there's one extra icon. There's one extra library that we have to add, and that's the Radix icons library. It took me like forever to figure out what kind of library they were using for the actual icons in this documentation, but it's apparently Radix-icons. So it goes at modules with a Z because they're cool / Radix icons, and I'm gonna press enter. Alright, so now just to make sure that everything's working, I'm gonna go ahead and start our app. So I'll do npm start, and what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be importing a simple Mantine button. So right underneath everything it says all done. We're gonna just copy this little snippet of code right here, and we're gonna go into our app. I'm gonna open up my source folder, go into my app.tsx. I'm going to minimize my terminal just a little bit, and I'm going to get rid of this whole header content and import our button. It's going to be redlined, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to import the button from Mantine itself, and that is right up here. It's coming from Mantine /core, and so at the very top here I'll just install that. I'll just import that and just wait for my app to start. Alright, now that we've set up the entire project with all the dependencies and the packages that we need, next video we're going to learn how to use a Mantine Provider. Alright, so I went ahead and opened up the Mantine documentation, and I went into the Mantine Provider. What is a Mantine Provider? Well, according to their documentation, it's a simple component that allows you to change the theme globally. It is not required if you decide to use the default theme. What does that mean? What that means is that basically, whatever this Mantine Provider component encapsulates, it'll provide that custom theme to every single item within it. So in this example, this Mantine Provider has a custom theme for a font family of Open Sans, and it's applying this font to every single piece of text within the app. Before we actually use this, let's go ahead and talk about the theme objects that we can actually customize within Mantine, and there's a whole lot of items. Alright, so there's a whole lot of properties that you have available within the theme shape, and we're not going to be using every single individual item here. We'll be using some of them, but let's just talk about what these even are. So if you see right here, we have dir is equal to ltr, rtl, we have loader is equal to ovl or bars or dots. These are all the properties that you can give it for the Mantine Provider hook. So if you have loader right here, you can, if you were to use a loader, you can either have an oval type of loader, we can have either a bars, or we can have a dots. We'll be working with this and we'll show you how to use this. We have a color scheme, either we can be light or dark. We have a date format, it can only be a string, and we have colors here, and you might notice next to the colors it says record. Record basically means object, and then it says tuple. Tuple basically means an array. And it says here 10, so it would just be an array at least of 10 indices of strings. And then it says CSS properties. That is just going to be the CSS property. That's it. at a very simple level, that's all you have to worry about. Once you work with a few of these, then you'll be able to understand how to work with all of them basically. So let's actually get our hands dirty and figure out how to use these. Alright, so I went ahead and opened up the app that we were working on in the last video. And so we have a simple button here, but we should add some more content here so we can really test the limits of how to use the Mantine Provider. So underneath my div, I'm going to create a paper tag from the Mantine core, and I'll add a text tag as well. Same thing from the Mantine core, and I will just call it, this is a simple text tag. And I'll just go ahead and copy this and I'll paste it underneath here as well. And then I'll just put in some gibberish here just so we have some more text there. Perfect. And so underneath all of this, I'll go ahead and copy this button and I'll make another one. And underneath this too, I'll make a simple loader from the Mantine core. And if we actually go inside of the app, we should see a bunch of stuff here. So we have our simple paper right here, 2 buttons, and a loader. So let's go ahead and actually provide some Mantine Provider styling to these items. Alright, so I'm going to go back into my app and I'm going to encapsulate all of these items in a Mantine Provider tag. So I'll do Mantine Provider and I'll copy this and I'll put it right down here. Perfect. So to make this work, like we saw in the documentation, we need to add theme is equal to 2 curly braces, and inside of there, if I were to press Windows, Control space, we'll see that we have all these items to work with. The first thing that we're going to do is let's go ahead and change the font of all of these texts to a open sans. So if I do font family, open sans, and I save it, we should ideally see every single text here is changed to open sans. Now you might notice that the loader doesn't change to open sans because there's no text there. Perfect. So now if I go back into the app, let's add some more styling to it. So if I were to do color scheme, this is a really cool thing about the Mantine library itself, is that most things already have a color scheme to it that's dark and light, and I'll show you guys how to actually use that in the next course video. So I'll just put in a simple dark theme right here, and if I go back into the app, we should see that our paper and the text inside of it is automatically dark mode. Perfect. Now if I go back into the app again, let's go ahead and change all of the font sizes to be something else. So font size ziz, and I'll do a object, and inside of the object I'll do MD. So before I do MD, let's just do this real quick. Let's do control space, and we'll see that we have a bunch of options here: large, medium, small, XL, and XS. So this just basically means that we're going to apply a certain size to all of these types of text sizes. So in our case, all of these texts already have a MD on them. So I'm gonna just do MD, and I'll do, let's say, to be 100% sure that this is working, I'll do like 90. And if I go back into the app, we'll see that it's not working because we need a comma there. So if I go back into the app, we'll see, perfect, it's showing 90 font size right here. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit smaller. So I'll just do like 12. Next thing, let's work on the radius for the actual paper. And the way that we can do that is we just have to do radius. Again, if I were to do control space, we'll see large, medium, small, extra large, extra small. In our case, the paper is actually set at small. And I'll just do, let's do like 232. And this should be basically really smooth along the edges, just like that. Perfect. So if I were to go back into the app and remove this, we'll see that originally it was a lot more boxier. Alright, let's talk about color. In my opinion, this is by far the most complicated part of this entire process, is understanding how to apply colors to certain components inside of the Mantine Provider. But it's fairly simple once you get a hang of it. So right here we see how it says here record and tuple. I'll show you guys exactly how to use this in a bit, But if we go into the documentation and we see this right here, it says extend theme, and I open that up, and if I scroll a little bit down, we'll see here called default colors. Mantine uses open color in default themes with some additions. Each color has 10 shades. So this is a little bit weird. I don't know why Mantine does like that, but you would need to actually have 10 indices of colors to choose from, and the library that Mantine uses is called open color. So if you open that up, we'll see all these colors that are available to us. These are more than enough colors for most people's needs, and so let's go ahead and actually use some of these colors and override some of the colors that are already present in most of the components itself. Alright, so I went ahead and split the screen into two, so it's a little bit easier for you guys to understand how this works. So after the font sizes, I'm going to do colors. Whoa, what the heck is that? Colors. And the record is an object, and then it says here, let's see here, what does it say again? It says string. So the string that we're going to be replacing is called blue, and inside of there it says a tuple, which is an array, and it asks us for at least 10 different tuples or 10 different array indices. So I'll just do 10 strings here really quickly. 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll just copy these. Alright, so now we have 10 indices, and inside of the open color library, I'm going to go ahead and just click on all of these, well, just randomly click on them, and I'll just pick out a whole bunch of different colors. So I like some indigo, I like some cayenne, I like me some orange, I'm feeling a little yellowy, well, yellow 7-y, lime 9, why not, why not? Let's go with, let's go teal this time. Let's try a little bit of teal in life. Let's hit up some indigo once again. I think we already hit it up. Of course we need some grape, even though grapes are not colored purple. And of course we need some red. Alright, perfect. So now, let me just format this real quick. There we go. So now we have 10 colors. Let's go ahead and apply some of these colors to some of these items right here. Alright, so now if we actually go back into our app, funny enough, some of these colors are already applied to some of the components, like the loader has the orange and the buttons have the grape color. So what if you want to actually select a specific index from this array right here? It's really simple. You have two different ways of approaching this. First one is probably the easiest, is inside of the actual Mantine provider, outside of the theme, you can do styles with 2 curly braces, and we can target the specific thing we want, so button, and then we can do smooth curly brace, theme, arrow function, smooth curly brace, and then really curly braces. I don't know their specific names and I will never learn them. But then we can do root, and then we can do background, color, and we can do theme, dot, colors, dot blue, and let's say we select the very first indice, which was I think like a reddish color, so if we save that, now we have, oh, that indigo, I think it's indigo, but now let's go ahead and select our last index right here, and we have red. See how cool that is? So now every single button is reflective upon that theme. Cool. Now what if we want every single loader in our app to be a certain kind of loader? Well, the Mantine provider allows us to be able to do that. So going back inside of our theme right here, on top of our colors, I will do loader, and inside of strings we have 3 options here: bars, dots, and ovals. Let's just see what the bars looks like. And now we have a bar loader. If I were to do dots, we should see a whole bunch of dots, and if I were to do oval, it'll go back to the original of oval. Awesome. Alright, before I conclude this tutorial, let me just quickly talk to you about the nested Mantine providers. This is also really cool, is that let's say you have some components that you don't want the parent Mantine provider to inherit all the styling from, you can create a nested Mantine provider. So right here we have this parent Mantine provider with a font family of Georgia, serif. And let's say we want a button that is a whole different font family. All we have to do is we just put in the Mantine Provider tag and encapsulate whatever we want with that, and it will inherit the nested Mantine Provider's theme instead of the parents. So in our case, if we just copy this piece of code right here and we paste it underneath our buttons, we'll see that when we go into it, it'll, number one, not inherit any of the colors. It will have its own font family. Alright, so last time we left off, your app should have looked something like this right here. We were using the Mantine Provider. So what we're going to do is we're going to scratch all of this and we're going to start from the beginning. I'm going to show you guys how to structure the actual app in a way so you can actually use the dark theme in every single file automatically. So going into my code editor, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Explorer tab, and I'm going to get rid of all of this information right here since we're not going to need any of it, as well as get rid of this import tag. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I went ahead and created a folder called components. I'm going to create two files inside of it. One is going to actually host the light to dark theme button, and the other one is going to host our cards, our containers, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to click new file and I'll call it light dark button.tsx, and the next one I'll just call it cards.tsx. Now your app should bug out because of course we have nothing inside of there. Alright, so I went ahead and opened up the beautiful documentation that Mantine provides, and I went into the grid section, and this is what we're going to be using for our cards to be able to collapse on each other at a certain breakpoint. And like a lot of libraries, Bootstrap, Material UI, Mantine, they all have grids. In Mantine's case, they use Flexbox Container for their grid system. And so if we scroll a little bit down, we are going to see all of these different types of grids. We even have this example of live examples of how we can have our grids look like here, but we're going to scroll a little bit more down and we'll see this grid right here called responsive columns. This is actually what's going to allow us to, at a certain breakpoint, collapse our cards on top of each other. So if I were to go into my inspect tool really quickly, I'll just show you guys what I mean. So right now if we see it's horizontally stacked like this, and then if I minimize it, it goes into 2 by 2, and then it just goes 1 by 1. Alright, so to implement this, it's going to be really simple. I'm going to go back into my VS Code, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this basic app.tsx stuff right here, and I'll just paste it inside of both of these files. And I'm going to get rid of this app import, app CSS import, since we don't have it there. So for our light dark button, I'll just call it light and dark mode button, and I'll export the exact same thing. And for their cards, you guessed it, I'll just call it cards, and I'll export cards as well. So now what I'm going to do is go back into the docs, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this grid information right here and just import it into my cards file. So now we also have to import it. So I'll just do grid, and we want it from Mantine core, and let me just make it prettier, like so, using prettier. Inside of my app.txs, this is our main hub for all of our components. So I'm just going to go ahead and import cards from our component cards. And so now if I go back into my app, we'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if I were to do it in responsive mode, we'll see that it will collapse. So now it's on 2 by 2, and then on top of each other. Awesome, so now let's go ahead and import and add our cards. So before we continue, there's a few more grid configurations that we need to add, because what's going to happen is when we add our cards, they'll be stretched as far wide as it possibly can, and that's not going to look good from a user's perspective at all. So to fix that, I'm going to go back into my VS Code, and inside our grid, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a justify space around, so it's not at the very end and it's not space between, it's just around. And the next thing I'm going to do is inside of each of these grid columns, I'm going to get rid of this MD and LG3. Whoops. And first thing I'm going to do is I'll do style is equal to max width at 350 pixels. And the next thing we'll do is SM is equal to 4 and XS is equal to 4. Now, what does SM and XS stand for? So what that means is if we go into the grid documentation and we read right here, it says here, use breakpoint props XM, SM, MD, LG, and XL to make columns respond to viewport changes. So basically that just means at a certain breakpoint, we want our columns to reflect a change. So in this example, up to MD, there will be 1 column. From MD to LG, there will be 2 columns. And from LG and up, there will be 4 columns. So we can test this right now. We have 4 columns right here because we're at a large breakpoint. If we go to medium to large, then we'll have 2 columns. And if we go anything less, we'll have 1 column. Alright, so now let's go ahead and import our card. So instead of the search field, I'm going to go ahead and search card. And the first one is more than enough that we need. So first I'm going to copy this stuff right here. So this is going to be our use Mantine theme. And we don't need a secondary color. So let's go ahead and just import our use Mantine theme for now, since we're going to be implementing our own dark theme and light theme ability. And let's go ahead and also import it into our app like so. Next, let's go ahead and import all of our tags for the actual card. And so what I'm going to do is, since we've made our grid work with only 3 cards for now, I'm going to get rid of this 4th card right here, and I'll just import it right where the numbers are. So that's 1, and that's 2, and that's 3. Now let's go ahead and import these actual tags. So card from Mantine core, image from Mantine core, group, same thing, text, badge, and we don't want secondary color since we are going to be implementing our own dark theme, light theme that I said earlier, and button as well. What else is left? Bright secondary color. Let's go ahead and get rid of those 2 right here. Awesome. So now if we go back into our app, we should see that our cards are imported, and if we try to make it responsive, we can see that it does collapse properly. Let's go ahead and actually add some images because that is looking really nasty. So the image that I chose to go with was a space image right here by Vincentiu Solomon. I hope I pronounced that right. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the image address, and I'm going to paste it wherever this image.png is. And we also have to always give credit to the person taking the image. So I'll just go ahead and do that as well. So instead of on sale, I'll just put in his name like that. And so now if we check it out, it should, beautiful. Look at that beauty. So now if I were to collapse it, it collapses beautifully. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and add a paper and then add our code for the dark theme and light theme button. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at the documentation for dark theme. So going back into it, I'm going to search up dark theme, and my god, this documentation, it's beautiful. That was a chef's kiss right there. And so if I scroll a little bit down, I'm going to see this button right here, this beautiful button. If I click it, it goes between light and dark theme. This is what we're going to be using inside of our file. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this item right here, and I'm going to paste it between these divs. We also have to import all these items as well. And next thing we need to do is we need to import our toggle color theme and whether or not it's dark or light. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this stuff right here. And now let's go ahead and also import our use Mantine color scheme. Alright, and the color scheme that is going to be available to us will be these 10 colors right here. So we don't actually need to worry about importing them. It automatically is part of the color scheme hook. So now what we need to do is we need to contain our app inside of a color scheme provider and a Mantine provider that has our custom color scheme right here. So to do that, it'll be really simple. So I'm going to go back into my code editor. I'm going to save this first of all, and I'm going to go into my app.tsx, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to import color scheme provider, and I'll put in our cards, and I'll also put in our light dark mode button, oops, with a self-closing brace like so. And this color scheme provider needs a few things. It needs to have a color scheme and a toggle color scheme. So I'll just give it color scheme, and we'll just do color scheme. We haven't made this variable yet, don't worry. And the next thing we need is a toggle color scheme like so. And same thing, it'll be called toggle color scheme. And now we need to actually input a Mantine Provider hook. Oops, Mantine Provider tag. And just put in our card and our light and dark mode button. And for this color scheme, I'll just do theme is equal to color scheme. And just to make sure that our background is also dark mode, I'll just do a simple paper. Same thing, I'll just go ahead and import our cards and our light mode and dark mode button inside of there. And for our paper, I'll give it a padding of 0. We'll give it a radius of 0. I meant to give it a padding of mid and a radius of 0. Got that confused. And a style, just make sure that it stretches across the screen. We'll give it a min height of 100 VH. So now what we need to do is we need to create our variables color scheme and toggle color scheme. Alright, so to do that, I'm going to go back into my documentation, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy, I think it was this information right here. If you scroll a little bit more down, it says here save to local storage and add a keyboard shortcut. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this information right here, and I'll paste it right above here like so. Let's go ahead and import all of our values. Alright, so let me just quickly walk you guys through what we did here. The first thing we did here, we created a useState-like variable called useLocalStorageValue, which is an actual hook that Mantine provides us to use our local storage values, and it's saying what key we're using and what the default value will be. So it's going to be this key, and our default theme value will be light. Next thing is we're creating our toggle color scheme, which is setting our color scheme to be either light or dark, depending on what value we're giving it. And the last thing right here is called use hotkeys, which is on Windows, I think it's Windows Control J or Windows J, and on Mac is Command J, I think. It'll toggle between light and dark mode. So if I save this and I go into my app, we see our button is right here. We can click it and go back and forth between the two. If I were to save it, we'll see that it saves to our local storage, and I refresh the page. That's working perfectly fine. Let me just see if this works. So Command J on Apple, I think it's Control J or Windows J on Windows. Alright, so it's actually Control J or Command J for Mac and Windows. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to work with buttons. We'll be doing a couple of use cases and running through the documentation for Mantine buttons. And by the end of this tutorial, you'll have a pretty good understanding how to work with them and how to implement them into your own application. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I've opened up the Mantine documentation for button. The link to this is in the description below. And the first thing you might notice is that we have 3 tabs here. One is for the documentation, one is for component props, and the other one is for Styles API. Alright, so if we go into our component props, we'll see that out of the box we have a whole bunch of stuff available to us, a whole bunch of props available to us. We have our name, the default value, the type, as well as the description for each of the individual props. And right next to there we have our Styles API. This is something we're not going to really tackle in this tutorial, so I'm going to go back into my documentation, and let's go ahead and talk about what most of these things mean, and let's go ahead and implement a few use cases inside of our project. Alright, so the first thing that we have here is the usage. This is really useful if we want to create a simple button without having to manually build it out of CSS, refresh the page over and over again. And the first thing that we have right here is the variant. The variant is just the different type of variant that you want for the button. So we have a couple of options. One of them isn't available here, but we'll actually implement that into our own app. First one that we have here is called filled. Filled is just what the button is. It's just a button that's filled. Next one is light. So it's like filled, but it's just lighter. Next one, outline. It's just an outline of the button without anything inside of it besides the text. Next one is just the default button, so it has no coloration. You can't make a different color. It's just a default button. Last one is subtle. So initially it looks like text, but if you hover over it, you'll see the button. That does have different coloration to it. Next thing that we can talk about is the color. These colors are coming directly from the open color library right here. So we have all these available to us right here. Next thing is radius. So let me go ahead and change it to back to filled. So initially we have extra small radius, so you can't really tell there's any radius, all the way up to extra large radius. We have sizes, so extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. We can disable the button if we wanted. We can make it compact. We can have it to be uppercase or lowercase, and we can actually affect the string inside of it. So if we wanted hello world inside of the button, we can have that as well. And right below that, we can actually see our button code implemented right here. So we can just go ahead and copy this into our app if we wanted. Right below everything, underneath the actual usage, we have our variants, and just goes into a little bit more detail about how to work with that. And this is the variant that's not available inside the usage. It's a gradient variant, and this is something I've never seen before in any library, and I think it's really cool. You have the option to have a gradient button, which initially was very difficult for me to implement just with regular CSS or style components. So this is what we're going to be actually implementing into our app. Below that we have our white variant. White variant is a variant in which button background color is always white, both in light and dark theme, and the color is controlled by the color prop. After that we have the loading state. This is really useful. This is in most libraries like Material UI and Design, where you have a loading state for your button. So if we were to enable it, we can see that the button is loading and is disabled. We can have it positioned either left or right. Next thing, we have our own customization if we want for the button. We have a whole bunch of options that we can give it. The main ones that we can go with is the styles with the theme provider, and we can just go ahead and edit the root, the hover, left icon, whatever we want inside of the button. We can provide a component tag as well, so if we want the button to, instead of being a button, we can have it just be an anchor tag. We can have it to go to a separate tab as well. We can give it the href that we want to actually redirect to, so this would go to the Mantine dev Twitter page. Below that we have the size and radius for the button. Next thing, compact. So like we saw in the beginning of the video, we can have our buttons be really skinny in height. Next one is the full width and overflow. So if we want the button to be full width, we can do that as well, but if we want it to be a certain width only, we can have that as well with an overflow. And after that, this is something we're not going to implement in this tutorial. We'll be doing it in a future tutorial where you can actually have our buttons link to React Router and work with React Router as a link tag. But we'll be working with this when we create an app bar. Next thing is providing custom element with TypeScript, getting the button ref, and just a simple unstyled button. So let's go ahead and actually implement this button into our app, and let's work with this. So I went ahead and opened up the application that we've been working on from our previous course tutorials, and the first thing that we're going to do is inside of our components folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'll just call it, I'll call it buttons.tsx, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy what we have inside of our cards file, just so we have some content inside of this file so TypeScript doesn't yell at us. And I'll call the function to be exported to be buttons. We'll get rid of all of this stuff right here. We don't need any of it. We'll get rid of this as well, and we'll get rid of every single thing within our div. And the only thing we're going to put inside of there, we'll just put in hello from button component. And let's go ahead and import that into our app.tsx file right here. We'll put it right above, right underneath our cards. So I'll do buttons from our buttons component. And if I go back into my app, we should see, perfect. So now we've connected our button component to our main app component. Let's go ahead and import some buttons. Alright, so the way that we're going to import this, it'll be really simple. The button that we're going to be grabbing will be our gradient button right here, since it's a variant that we can't actually test in the usage case right here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just go ahead and copy all 5 of these buttons, and I'll put it into my buttons component right here. So I'll replace this with that, and we need to import buttons from our Mantine core. So I'll just do import curly braces button from at Mantine /core, and that's all we need to do. So if we go back into our app, we should see our gradient buttons available to us right there. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and mess around with this a little bit. Alright, so the first thing I got to tell you guys is that with the gradient variant, you can't have light mode or dark mode enabled themes, so it'll always stay as that gradient no matter what. With the other variants, you do have the ability to have different themes available when you switch between light and dark mode. So inside of the variant gradient, we have this gradient property, so it goes from a color all the way to a different color. So in this case, we have indigo to cayenne, teal to lime, teal to blue, and then you notice that we have degree 275, degree 60, degree 35. That just means what kind of degree that you want for the gradient. So we can go all the way from 0 to 360. So I can choose, instead of 60, we can do like something like 90. And if we go into our teal blue, we should see that is exactly 90, like so. It's perfectly even. Let's say if we wanted, we can customize a lime green. Let's say if we wanted 180. Now we see that's 180, so it's from bottom to top. Now let's go ahead and import a simple icon. How would that look? Well, since we already have an icon available to us, I'm just going to go ahead and use that. So I'll just copy this import from our light dark button component. We'll import it into our button component. And the way that we import this is really simple. We can either do left icon or we can do a right icon. We can't do top or bottom, sadly. But with some styling, of course, you can do it like that. So the way that we can actually import an icon is we need a tag. So sun icon, self-closing brace, that's all we need. And now if we go into my indigo to cayenne, we'll see that we have a sun icon like so. Alright, let's talk about loading and how we can work with that. So I'm going to use my other button right here, the lime green button, and all we have to do is we have to implement the prop loading, and we have to set it either to be true or false. So in our case, I'll do true, and if we go back into our app, we should see that it's loading. Now what if we want to do it on click? That's really simple as well. All we have to do is create a on click function, call it handle click, and all we have to do is create that function right here. So const handle click, and we will have to also create a use state variable as well. So we'll do const loading and set loading to be use state false, and we just call set loading here and loading to be true. Whoops, there we go. And all we have to do is just have to implement loading where our true is. And now if we save it and we were to click this button, it loads. Alright, now if we want to try to redirect somebody, all we have to do is component is equal to an a tag, and then all we have to do, give it is the href, and we'll just redirect it to https://www.google.com. and if I save it and we go into our app and I click on the teal blue, it'll redirect to there. If we want to have it open in a separate tab, all we have to do is just give it a target is equal to, in quotes, _ blank, and that's it. Alright, so if you want to apply custom styling, it's really simple. All you have to do is use the styles tag. With curly braces, we have to give it a theme, arrow function. Oops. There we go. And inside of here, we can apply all of our custom themes that we want, or custom styles that we want. So if we want to target the root, all we have to do is root, and then remember that since we are using a gradient variant, we can't give it a background color because it just won't apply. If you were using a variant like filled, outline, that type of stuff, then it would work. But we can do something like border. Oops. We can give a border to be 0. Height, we can give it like 500 pixels. Padding right, we can give it 69 pixels. If we want to target on hover, that's also really simple. All you have to do is quotes and colon hover. If we want on hover, let's say we can give it a padding left of 100 pixels. And so now if I were to go in the app and we try this out, right now it's at 5. That's really long, but if I hover over it, we add that hover effect as well. Let's say if we want to change the font styling, the font family, all we have to do is font family, in quotes, we give it whatever we want, so I'll give it monospace, and then it will apply the monospace as well, like so. And in today's video, we're going to be learning about how to use the AppShell component in Mantine. So don't worry, your project does not look anything like this. This is what we're going to be building by the end of the project. So we'll have learned how to work with the nav bar right here on the side, the header, as well as the AppShell. So inside of the AppShell, we have a simple table. Inside of the header, we put our dark and light theme button. If you want to know how to implement that, the link to that video is in the description below, and the nav bar right here. Without further ado, let's get into it. First things first, before we even jump into anything, we have to learn about the actual AppShell and how it works. So according to the documentation that I've pulled up here, the link to this is in the description below. AppShell is a layout component that can be used to create a common header, navbar, content layout pattern. AppShell, header, and navbar components include bare minimum default styles to simplify customization. Basically, that just means there's 3 parts to AppShell. You have the actual app right here. You have the header, which most people actually call a navbar, and you have the actual navbar on the side right here. And if we scroll a little bit down, we'll see how this is actually implemented into code. We have a main AppShell component, and inside of there we have the props, navbar, header, and the styles applied to it. My only gripe with the documentation for AppShell is the fact that for the navbar content and the header content, they don't actually put anything here to actually make this example. But if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see this responsive styles. Now this is what's used to actually collapse the navbar at a certain viewpoint. So if I were to go into my inspect tool and I were to resize this, we'll see that it gets smaller and smaller until a certain viewpoint where it just collapses, and we see this hamburger icon, which I click, and it'll open up the navbar. So this is what we're actually going to be implementing into our app today. Alright, so last time we left off, our app looked something like this, where we implemented our buttons. And I'm going to go into my code editor, and the first thing that we're going to be doing is we have to create a new component, and I'll call the component AppShell.tsx. And I'm going to go back into the Mantine documentation, and I am going to just copy the responsive styles example right here. And I'll paste that into that file, and we're going to change this name to be AppShell example, and we also have to export it as well, so to export default, just like that. And now if we were to put it into our application, it'll basically cover up the entire app. So I'll do AppShell example like so. If we go back into our app, we'll see that we have it imported. Now let's go ahead and actually make it look responsive and actually add our content inside of it. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of our cards, the buttons, and the paper right here, since we don't need any of that stuff. In fact, I'm going to take this light and dark mode button, and I'm going to put it inside of our header, so it'll be right next to our application navbar, like so. We also have to import it. Oh, whoops, it's actually in the navbar. Let's put it in the header, which is right down here. So right below there. There we go. So now if we look at it, it should be perfect. Awesome, so now it's right here. So if I were to toggle dark mode and light mode, it should toggle perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and make this actually toggle dark mode and light mode. So to do that, what I'm going to do is go into my app.tsx, and I'll cover my AppShell example in a paper tag. And so now if we go back into our app, we should see perfect. So now we have the AppShell, the navbar, and the header, dark mode, light mode compatible. Now let's go ahead and actually add some content inside of the items. So the content that we're going to be filling our AppShell with is going to be a simple table. So inside of the search field in the Mantine documentation, I'll search up table, and we'll see this example, the very first example right here of a table. This is exactly what we're going to be using, so let's go ahead and copy that. And we'll import that into our project. So I'm going to create a new component. I'll call it table example.tsx, and I'll import it. Let's get rid of this name and call it table example, and we will export it as well. So export default table example, and we also need to actually get our data. So there's an example for that right above it right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this, and right above everything, oops, inside of there, I'm gonna go ahead and paste it, and I'll just copy this a couple of times, and I'll just paste that there, just so we have enough data so we can actually scroll. And so now what we have to do is we have to import it into our AppShell, and it's really simple. What we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this text right here, which is inside of the AppShell, and we're going to import our table example. And now if we go back and we go into our app, we should see a proper table where we can scroll. And now if we try to inspect it and we try to make it responsive and we minimize it, we'll see that it is responsive, and the app bar and nav bar do actually collapse, like so. Alright, now let's go ahead and talk about the actual nav bar itself, and let's add a few sections into the nav bar so we can see how that would work. So to add the sections, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this text right here, and I'll do navbar.section. And the first section, we'll just put a simple text right here, and that'll just be hello, this is title. And the next section, same thing, navbar.section. But for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to give it a grow, and empty is equal to large, which will allow it to actually grow. And so for this, I'm going to give it the same thing, text, and I'll say example 1, and I'll copy this example and I'll paste it 4 times, and I'll just rename these right here. So 2, 3, and 4. And so now we have 2 sections, and now if we want to add the final section, all we need to do is we just need to copy this, and now this is our footer. Oops, not fodder, footer, there we go. And if I go back into the app and I open this up, we'll see that we have a title, our section for the links, and our footer. Alright, so now I'm just going to quickly talk about each of these properties that we've added into our AppShell. So the first one is the navbar offset breakpoint, which according to the documentation controls when the navbar should no longer be offset with padding left, which isn't that big of a deal. And the next one after that is fixed prop on AppShell will automatically be added to the header and navbar. So what this means is if we didn't have fixed, instead of the app bar actually collapsing on itself, it'll just continuously stay there for as long as it possibly can. And from a user perspective, that's not very good. So we're going to keep that fixed right there. Our next thing is the padding in the navbar, and this is just going to be the simple padding of the actual navbar. So if we go into our inspect tool and we inspect this right here, we'll see this green box right here. That's the medium padding. If we did extra large, it'll have more padding. Next thing is the breakpoint at which the navbar will be hidden if the hidden prop is true. So right now it's at small, so at the small viewpoint, it'll be hidden like that right there. But if I were to do, let's say, large, it'll be then hidden at large right over here. As you can see, it's not there anymore. So we're going to keep it as small, and we're going to keep this as small as well. Next thing is hidden is equal to not open. So hides the navbar when the viewport size is less than the value specified in the hidden breakpoint. So what this open basically means is that whenever the hamburger icon will appear on the app bar, will collapse and uncollapse. Initially, if we do not opened, it'll not open, but if we do it as opened, when it hits that little viewpoint right there, it'll show it immediately. So from a user's perspective, we want to make sure it's disabled, like so. After that, we have the width. So at the small viewport, it'll have 300 width, and the large viewport is at 400 width. So if we did, let's say, 500 width at the small, we should see right here, we see it's substantially bigger. Well, not substantially, it's a little bit bigger than the large viewport. So before I talk about the header, we're actually going to make a small change to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these align item center and the width 100%, and I'm going to replace it with a justify content to be a space between, so we actually have the item space between like that right there. So now let's talk about the actual header. Alright, so you might be seeing right here the very first thing, the media query. It says here larger than, small, and then styles none. You can think of this sort of like an if statement where you're saying if the media query is larger than small, then make sure that the burger right here, whatever is inside of the media query, in this case is the burger icon, has a display none. If it is less than small, then it will show the hamburger icon like so right there. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about chips. We're not going to be talking about potato chips, and if we were, we'd be talking about Pringles and not those god-awful 70% bagged air Lay's chips. No, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the chips component that Mantine Core has. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I've opened up the documentation for chips, and the link to this is in the description below. And the first thing that we see right here is the usage column, where we can see that we have 4 chips in a group, where we can edit the color to be whatever we want, have a different state if we want it to be filled or outlined, have a different level of spacing, size, and radius. And the very first thing underneath that, the code, you can see that all of these chips are encapsulated in a chips tag, where we have the color, the spacing, the size, and the radius. And inside of the encapsulation, we have each chip component, and they have their own values associated to that. If we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see states, and we can see that there's 3 different states available to us. And the very first one is the default state, so it's outline default. It has no check mark, it has nothing. It is just either filled or has an outline. The next one is a checked state, so it can be checked and it can be either outlined or filled. And the final one is a checked disabled state, which basically means they are checked, but it's also a disabled button, so nobody can actually press it. Now if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see the multiple prop. This prop allows us to be able to select multiple chips at once if we wanted, and the way to trigger this, all we have to do is just add multiple in our chip group component tag. But if we don't have multiple, it'll just allow us to select a single chip at a time. With it, we can select multiple at one time. So if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see the controlled section right here. This is actually what we're going to be using to work with and get our hands dirty with. So we are going to skip this part for now, and we'll get back to it later. After that, we'll see the chip component. We can use the chip component outside of the chips context. So this is just a regular single chip where we have a useState variable that we can either check to be true or false, depending on whether or not the user clicked it. After that, we can also apply our own styling if we wanted using the create styles method. Alright, so that covers the visual part of the documentation. Before we get our hands dirty with this component, if we scroll to the very top, we will see the component props right here. I'd highly recommend you go through these and you just check them out really quickly. We have the name, the type, and the description of what each of these props does for us, but we will be covering some of them in today's video. So without further ado, let's get cracking with it. Alright, so I went ahead and opened up my VS Code for the project that we've been building throughout the series, and the first thing that we're going to be doing is we are going to be commenting out our table example that we made in the last tutorial where we learned how to make an AppShell. The link to that is going to be in the description below as well. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we are going to create a component file within our source folder, inside of our components folder, and we'll call it chipsexample.tsx. And right now it's going to error out, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the code that we have from our cards component, and I'm just going to paste it inside of there, and I'm going to change the name from cards to be chips example, and I'm going to clear out this stuff right here, so we're just going to gut this entire thing out, and I'll replace the grid with a div tag, and we'll replace all of this stuff with a chip and a chip, so a chips and a chip, like that. Perfect. And now let's go ahead and import it into our AppShell. So instead of table example, I'll just do chips example with a self-closing brace. Oops. And now we've imported our chips. Let's go ahead and actually add some chips to our chips example. Alright, so I'm in the documentation again, in the controlled section. I'm going to scroll a little bit down, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this chips example right here, and I'll paste it into my chips example div. And the next thing we need to add is our value and set value. So same thing here, let's copy this. We'll paste it at the very top right there. Let's import the use state. And just so we can actually tell when something is clicked, we'll just use a use effect. And I'll do console.log value so we can actually see the values changing whenever there's a new chip triggered. Alright, so before we test it out, let me just explain to you guys what we did here. So we have this chips component right here that encapsulates all of these 4 chips, where we have a value and an on-change set value, and we're allowing the chips to be selected multiple times so the user can select multiple chips. And basically what happens is that whenever a chip is clicked, it'll change the value use state array right here to add whatever selected or deselected chip was selected or deselected. So if we go into our app and we test it out, we can see already that we have 2 results right here. We have React that's already selected, then we have Angular, which is NG in this case, Svelte right there, and Vue. If we click one of them, it gets removed, another one removed, until we have all of them removed. Alright, now let's add a little bit of styling to this, because this is looking a little bit basic for my taste. So like I said in the beginning of the tutorial, if you scroll at the very top, we have this usage section right here where we can actually test out live examples of chips that we want to customize. So I'm feeling a little ready, and I like my chips to be filled. If only it was filled with chocolate chips, but it is what it is. So I want a little bit of spacing, I want some size to them, and I want absolutely no radius. So if we want to apply this, we have the code right here. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this right here, and I'll paste it into my main chips area like so. And now if we go into our app, we should see all the selected ones are red, have no radius, they're humongous, and that they look beautiful. So we can deselect, select whatever we want. Awesome, so now we have enough knowledge at a high level to work with chips and how to use them, how to use a group of chips, how to be able to set different values for selected and deselected chips in an array. In today's video, we're going to be learning about the input and input wrapper components in this library. And without further ado, let's get into it. And the very first thing that we see right here is a huge disclaimer that says, important in most cases, you should not use the input component in your application. Input component is a base for other inputs and was not directly designed to be used directly. So they give an example right here. There's an input wrapper, and then they put an input surrounded by an input wrapper. But the correct way of actually doing it is you would want a text input where you can have a label or a description. That's it. Since we're only going to be talking about text inputs in today's video, every single time you see this input, just automatically assume text input. But if you wanted, you can actually use this input tag, which right down here to describe for what purpose it is. The single purpose of input is to provide shared styles and features to other inputs. Use other components listed above to build forms, as they provide better accessibility, and input component as a base for your own custom inputs with Mantine theme. Alright, so if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see a live demonstration of the text input field in action. This is the thing I really like about this library, is the fact that you can live see what you're actually doing. And we see right here in the code, it says input, automatically assume text input in our scenario. Next thing is an icon prop. This icon prop by default places every single icon on the left hand side. You can actually specify to put something on the right hand side, whether it's an icon, a tool pin, a tooltip, or some text, whatever you want. But by default, this icon is placed on the left side. Next thing is a placeholder. A placeholder is just like any other placeholder that you have for a text input. It's some text before you start typing to be visible. And right next to there, we have our variants. We have default, filled, and unstyled. Filled is just filled, and unstyled absolutely has no styling to it. Placeholder, the placeholder like we just talked about. Radius, either we can have a huge radius where the corners will be round as possible, or we can have no radius. A huge size, or no size. We can make it disabled or invalid. And all the code again is live right here, so we can go ahead and just copy this and put it into our app if we wanted. Alrighty, so if you scroll a little bit lower, we'll see our 3 variants in action. We have the default variant, the filled variant, and the unstyled variant. According to the documentation, the unstyled variant input may significantly impact usability, so we have to use it wisely, or in fact just probably not use it at all if you can. And then if we scroll lower, we will see the icon and right hand section. Like I said earlier, the icon is by default on the left hand side, but you can always specify an icon, a tooltip, a chip, or whatever you want on the right hand section, and that's how this is being made right here. Right section and the right section width, and also the styles right section, pointer events none, so that when we point over it nothing happens. If we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see the right section with a tooltip. So this is really simple. All it's doing is that there's a variable right section and it has a tooltip and an info circled icon inside of it. So if we were to hover over it, we will see our tooltip right here. It says we do not send spam, and it's also being triggered on the right section right here. So it's just calling this variable right here in the right section. And so now if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see the sizes right here. We have 5 pre-made sizes: extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large. And we can use the size prop to be able to control the input height, padding, and font size. These examples is extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. And this is how you use it. You just have the size prop, and you specify in strings which one you want. After that, we can also add a custom component if you want. As input component is intended to be the base of all other inputs, you can pass component prop, which will define the root element. So in this case, they're making a button input right here by using the input prop, and the defined component is equal to button. And the next thing is an input, which is actually a component of select. So this is actually a select field right here. Next and final thing we're going to talk about is the headless variant. According to the documentation, if you want to add your own styles to the input, it's better to start from scratch rather than overriding Mantine styles. Use the special headless variant, which does not include Mantine styles, but it still supports all other features, icons, right section, etc. So this is really simple. All you're doing is variant is equal to headless, and that's it, and that'll allow you to be able to add your own style into it if you would like. So in this case, all they're doing is that they're applying a width of 100% and a box sizing of border box, but every single thing works exactly the same. You have your placeholder, you can have your text, you have your left icon, and you have your right section as well. And finally, we have the basic get input ref. Alright, so now before we do get our hands dirty with this component, we have to talk about the input wrapper so we can actually work with that and we don't have to worry about talking about it later. So very first thing we see is that there's a disclaimer that asks us do not use the input wrapper with Mantine inputs. It's already included in most inputs. So all you have to do is you have to do the exact same thing: text input, label, and description, and that's it. This already includes the input wrapper on it. After that, if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see that this usage looks a little bit more different than the one that we talked about right earlier with the input. We'll see that this one has a label, has a description, and an error. And this is really cool. I've never seen this before in any component library, where it already, without you having to actually specify what you want in separate divs for a title, a description, and an error, you have it all combined in this input wrapper. Alright, now that we ran through the documentation for both those components, let's get our hands dirty and work with them. So I've opened up the application that we've been building for the past couple of tutorials in the series. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead in my components folder, create a new file, and I will call it input example.tsx. And I'm going to put some basic code inside of it. So I'm going to copy from my chips example inside of my input example, and I'll replace the export default name as well. So I'll just call it input example, like so, and I'll clear out all this information, and I'm going to quickly import it into my AppShell so we have it actually visible. So I'll get rid of my chips example. Well, I'll actually just put it on top of there. So underneath my chips example, what I'll do is I'll do input example like that, and I'll save it, and I'll save this. Alright, so now let's go ahead and actually work with this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this stuff right here. We don't need that stuff. And I'll get rid of this. And what I'm going to do is I will import text input from the Mantine core library. And if we were to save this and we go into our app, we should see a basic text input right here. It has nothing inside of it, so let's put some icons and some content on the right hand section right here. So going back into my app, to add an icon, all we have to do is icon, curly braces, tag, and we have to just display what kind of icon you want. So because we are pro grammars, all we have to do is GitHub logo icon, And for something on the right hand section, I'll do right section, and let's say because we're absolutely friggin' crazy, I'm gonna put in a Notion logo icon. Absolute madness. Anyway, so if we look at this, we'll see an icon right here, and we'll see an icon right here. Let me zoom into a little bit. It might be really hard to see. So we have a Notion icon right there, and we have a GitHub icon right there. But bro, I made this input field just now, but I don't know what it's for. I don't know what kind of things they want from me. I don't know if it's required or not. Let me show you how to do that. It's really easy. Really easy. All you have to do is you have to write in for the label. You have to write in the label, and in strings I can put in, this is the best input field. If I can spell the input field. And if we want a description, all we gotta do is description is equal to, no, this is the best description. And if we want an error, because we're assuming that the user will have an error, we're gonna say you've bloody errored. And we're gonna also make this required. And so now what we've done is we give it a label, a title, a description, an error, and we made it required. So now if we go into the app, we'll see right there we have a title, we have our description, we have our error, and we have our required as well. Alright, so before I conclude this tutorial, let me just show you how to actually define different types of components using the input tag. All you have to do is input with the self-closing brace, and inside of here you have to do a component. You also have to import the component from Mantine Core. So all you have to do is component prop, and then inside of the quotes you can do the actual component you want. So in this case I'll do a simple drop down field, so all I have to do is select, and if I go into the app it'll be a select field like so, but there's nothing inside of it. Welcome back to this Mantine course, and in today's video I got something beautiful for you. I got a goddamn banger here. So today we're going to be talking about the text and the title component that's available in this library. And I know in the beginning of the series I told you guys that there's some things that Mantine has that Material UI doesn't have, and vice versa. Well, in this case it goddamn knocks it out of the park with these two components compared to Material UI. And by the end of this tutorial you should have a pretty good understanding of how to use the text and title tags. Without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so I've opened up the documentation for this component, and the link to this is in the description down below. And the very first thing you see right here, if we scroll down, is a usage tab, and you can see that we have a couple of really cool things that we have available to us for usages, and we have examples down here. So we have size, color, weight, underline, transform, align, and variant. A lot of these things you can do with original CSS, but I'm more than happy to actually see it in an actual library. So the very first thing, we have sizes that's available from extra small all the way to extra large. Colors, these are theme colors that are available to us from open colors. That's part of this actual library. Next thing is font weight, so it goes from 500, 700, bold, semi-bold, etc. Underline text, simple, you just have a line underneath the text. You can have transform text, uppercase, lowercase, capitalize, align the text property, whether you want to center, justify, left or right aligned, however you want it. And variant, text or link, and we have some examples right here on how they work right here. So we can see extra small to extra large, semi-bold, bold, underlined, link variant, red, blue, all the colors you want, gray text, uppercase, capitalized, aligned center, and aligned to the right text. Alright, so if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll actually see how these props work with the actual text component tag. So we have size, weight, underline, variant, a link, all the different colors, transform, align. And if we scroll lower than that, we'll see dimmed. So dimmed is an interesting thing. It just basically dims your text to a certain color prop. So right now, if we're in dark mode, we have it at dark number 2. But if we're in light mode, we're at gray number 6. Let me turn it back because my eyes are goddamn burning right now, dude. So if we scroll a little bit lower, this is actually what I'm most hyped about in this library, in this component, and that is a gradient variant. I am extremely hyped about this prop because I've never seen this before in any sort of library. So it's really, really innovative in my opinion, and it's really simple to use. All we have to do is set a variant to gradient, and we just have to set the actual gradient colors, and that's it. Scrolling a little bit lower, we'll see the line clamp prop right here. It allows us to be able to specify how much how many lines you want to display. So in this case, we're displaying 3 lines. We can have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we can have different sizes as well. By default, it is set as medium. After that, we have an example of the typography styles provider and the inherit styles. We won't be using this in today's tutorial, so we won't really worry about it, but the typography styles provider, Mantine does not expose typography global styles. We can use this provider to add Mantine typography to our HTML content. It's pretty much similar to the Mantine styles provider that we talked about a couple of tutorials ago. And at the very bottom right here, we have the custom component. So we're actually able to connect this to React Router DOM. You can see it's really simple. All we have to do is variant of link, provide the actual component, and we just have to display where we're trying to take it. Or we can have a regular normal link with a variant link component as an anchor tag, and where we're pointing that link to go to. Alright, before we get our hands dirty with this component, let's go ahead and talk about the title component really quickly. So I'm going to click title right here, and it's really simple. The title component is just headings from H1 to H6, and the way you use it is you need to use the title tag and the order from 1 through 6, which is basically H1 through H6, and that's it. Let's go ahead and start working with this. Alright, so I've opened up the app that we've been building, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just set up our component for our text stuff to be in. So I'm going to click on new file inside of my components folder, and I'll just call it text and title example.tsx, and I'll just copy the input example content and I'll put it inside of here, and I'll replace the name of these two to be title and text example, like so, and I'll just put in some basic text like so. Let's get rid of these two right here, save it, and let's go ahead and import it into our AppShell. So right underneath my input example, I'll just do text and title. Is it called text and title? I think title and text. Oops, I made it backwards. Title and text example, like so. Perfect. Alright, now we can see that it's imported and everything's fine. Let's go ahead and start working with the actual components. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the text component from the text tag component from Mantine, and I'll put in some basic lorem ipsum. All you have to do is type in lorem and you'll get this little bubble. Press tab, and we'll get a bunch of lorem ipsum. And now if we go into our app, we should see it work right there. Perfect. Alright, now let's go ahead and add some styling to this text to make this piece of lorem ipsum the most fabulous lorem ipsum you done ever seen. Alright, so let's go back into the app, and what I'm going to do is instead of the text right here, we're going to change the size of this. So you remember how to do that. All we have to do is size. We have to define what kind of size you want. We can do extra small or extra large. So let's do large in this case, and let's change the weight to be, let's say 700, and let's literally underline the entire text, and we can transform every single word to be capitalized. So I'll do capitalize, capitalize. I think that's how you spell it. So now if I go back into the app, we should see every single first letter is capitalized and underlined, font weight, and it's large. Alright, so now you might be asking, but I want to apply a gradient to only this amount of text right here. And to that I say, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. This is how you do it. So I'm going to go into the code editor, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that code and isolate it. So it's this right here. And what I'll do is I'll surround it in a text tag, like so. And what I'll do is I will make it a variant of gradient, like so. And let's give it our gradient that we want. And all you have to do is from, let's say the gradient, I want to make it as ugly as possible. So I'll do red to, oops, forgot the comma. Red to blue, and we'll do degrees at like 138 degrees. And just to make sure that we really distinguish this, let's go ahead and change the size. Let's make it extra large. because I think extra small would be a bit too small to see. So now if we go back into the app, we should see our gradient right here. We see that it's set, we see that it's huge, and it has that gradient color to it. Awesome. All right, now let's add the most important thing, a title. So to do that, all we have to do is we have to import the title tag from Mantine Core, and we have to give it an order. So let me give it an order, let's say H2, and I'll give the title, this is a big ol', I think it's like this, big ol' title. And now if we go back into the app, we should see, damn, this is a big old title. And that concludes this tutorial. Today's video, we're going to be learning about how to work with navigation, implementing our AppShell routes with React Router. And this is what we have for today. In our AppShell, we can see that we have 3 links right here. In the very first link, we have our chips component. We click on input, we'll see our input component, and you can see that it routes to /input. And the final one is our title component, and takes us to our text lorem ipsum that we worked on our last video. Without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so I've opened up the app and I'm inside of the AppShell component, and the first thing that we have to do is we have to install React Router DOM onto our project. So the way to do that, it's going to be npm I react-router-dom, and let it work its magic. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and also import all of my dependencies that we need for this to work. So at the very top here, I'll do import curly braces browser as router link route, and finally routes. And this will be imported from React Router DOM. Perfect. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to contain our entire app shell in a router tag. So to do that, I'm just going to type in router like so, and I'll take this end tag right here and I'll put it at the very bottom underneath my app shell end tag right there. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into my actual navbar link, so this section right here with the example 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'll just create a simple div tag, and inside of there I'll give it a little bit of styling where I'll just do display flex, and I'll do flex direction to be column. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all of these text right here since we don't need them. And inside of here is where we're going to host our links to go between our separate components. So what I'll do is I'll create a text tag like so, and I'll give it a component which is going to be equivalent to link, since the actual documentation for Mantine allows us to be able to connect with React Router DOM pretty easily with a text tag. So we can do component link, and I'll do variant is equal to link, and we want it to go to slash, just like that. Awesome. Whoops. And now inside of here I'll just type in home page, and I'll take this and I'll copy it 2 more times. Let's see how many components we have. We have 3 components, so 3 times is more than enough. And so we want the next our next page, which is going to be our input example page, so I'll just call that /input, and I'll call it input page, and the final one is going to be titles and text, so I'll just call it title page like so. Alright, now let's go ahead and actually direct our components to go to our certain routes. So I'm going to go down here into my actual component area inside of my app shell, and what I'll do is I'll contain this in a routes, and each of these routes is going to contain an individual route which will have a path equal to whatever our path was up over right here. So these 3 paths right here, to /input and /title page. And so we also have to give it an element, and that element, the first one, will be our chips example. So I'll do chips example like so, and this will be a self-closing brace. So I'll copy this and I'll paste it 2 more times, and the next route is /input, so I'll put in /input, and after that is title page, same thing, title page, and I'll put in my /inputs example, and I'll put in my title page example like so. Let's get rid of this, and now if we test out the app, whoops, looks like we have a small issue right here. It says that module React router DOM has no exported member browser. I actually meant to type in browser router instead of browser. Perfect. And now if we go into the app, we should see that we have 3 different inputs right here. Our very first initial route is /, which 100% works. So we have our chips being displayed right here. If I go to my input page, we see our inputs and it goes into that proper route. If I go to my title, we'll see our title page right here, our title component, as well as it going to its proper path as well. In today's video, we're going to be doing an introduction into Mantine dates. The reason we're not going to be making a single video dedicated to only Mantine dates, because I think that these individual components, such as calendar, date picker, date range picker, month, time input, they're very important components, and I think that they should have their own dedicated videos. And so in this tutorial, we'll just be covering what we're going to be doing in the next couple of videos and installing this into our project. So before we do begin, there's a small update that I wanted to let you guys know, and I wanted to give you guys a chance for you guys to see your own ideas in a video. So before I do finish off with this series or any subsequent series afterwards, you can leave an idea where you want to see a certain component being used, or you want to see a certain topic covered for the actual series that we're working on. So in this case, if you wanted to see a certain component being covered in Mantine that I haven't covered, you can leave that in the comments down below, and if it has a good amount of likes, or if it's a cool idea, then I'll definitely cover it, and I'll keep it to 2 max, and we'll see how it goes from there. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alrighty, so I've opened up the Mantine dates documentation, and the link to this is in the description down below. And the very first thing that we can see right here is the installation. Now, we haven't installed these packages onto our app yet. We will do that later in this video. Now if we scroll a little bit lower, we will see localization. So localization is a really cool concept that I've never seen used in any other library except for Mantine, where you're actually able to display certain languages for your calendar, date picker, month, whatever type of date picker that you're using. So in this case, they're importing the German language, and the way that they use it, all you have to do is locale, and you just specify the actual import. So in this case, you're using the German language with DE, and we can see this as an example. Let's say we go into the calendar and we go into localization right here. We can see that they're using the Russian language, and they're importing it right RU, and we can see right here they're using the Russian text for the actual month and the individual days as well. So now if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll actually see the individual components that is available for us in Mantine dates. So the very first thing, we have date picker. It's really simple. You have a calendar and you can pick a date and it'll appear inside of the input. Next one, this is by far my most favorite one, is the date range picker. I have never been able to find a good date range picker that's #1 free and is dark mode, and Mantine provides that. So if I click on it, we can see that we have a month right here, and we can select a certain date all the way up to another certain date, and it'll select it for us properly. After that, we have the time input. Now this is a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit UI wise a little bit weak, where in pure UI you would have an actual pop-up where you can actually select from a clock, but in this case you can just type in whatever time you want. So if I wanted, let's say 1:59, we can just type in inside of there. Next thing, we have the calendar, just a basic calendar where you can select a date. And after that, we have a date range calendar, so I can click this and it'll take us all the way to a certain range. After that, we just have a month, and that basically covers all the components. And after that, we have some utility functions. So right here it says here, apart from components, that Mantine dates package also exports several utility components. So we can get an array of weeks of the current month. We can get the month names in English as well as in the specified language that we want. We can get it in. We can get a array of short week days names for a given locale, array of years in a given range. We can get is same date, is same month. So we have a pretty solid library of dates that we can tackle from. In the next video, we'll be talking about how to work with the time input component. So before we end this tutorial, we actually have to install the Mantine dates. So I'm going to scroll at the very top, and since we used npm to install it, I'm going to go ahead and copy the very first one right here, and I'll go into our app that we've been building, and I'm going to open up a new terminal. I'm using bash. Oops, not bash. I'm using ZSH, and I'm going to go ahead and paste the code right there and let it work its magic. Perfect, now everything is installed. In this video, we're going to be learning about how to work with the month calendar input as well as the month calendar range input. This is what we're going to be building right here. We have this Ukrainian awesome calendar. We have two of them right here. So this is March, I think this is April, and we're able to specify a certain date as well as go into different months as well. And below that we have a range calendar input, so we can specify, let's say March the 1st all the way up to April 29th. And by the end of this tutorial, you'll learn how to style, how to work with at a high level, and how to understand how to use this component in your own project. Without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so I've opened up the documentation for calendar, and the link to this is in the description down below. And the very first thing that we can see right here is the usage tab. And in the usage tab, we have a simple calendar. We can select from the year to the actual month and into the actual day. And you can see right down here is the usage tab. We have a set value where we can check the actual date that's selected by the user on this on change. But this is a little bit wrong in the documentation. It's weird, but what you would have to do is instead of null, you would do new space date, and you just call the function. After that, we have the controlled month prop. What this allows us to do is to be able to display a certain month. So in this scenario, we can either display the current month that the user is in by creating a useDate variable and do new date and assign it to on month change and on month. And after that, if we wanted to just set a certain initial month, then all we have to do is initial month and then set it as new date. So this would, in our case, show March the 5th or the month of March. Alright, so after that we have a prop called level change, or called allow level change. Basically what this means is that there's 3 levels to a calendar: the day, the month, and the year. In this case, if you were to set allow level change to be false, you can't actually change the actual year that the user is in. You can't change it through here, but you can't manually click on this and change it from there. After that we have localization. Now Mantine dates components are built upon date.js library, where we can actually define a local data. So if you wanted to show a month from Russia with their language for their days and everything, then we can actually do that. Now I did find a JSON file that actually contains every single majority of all the single countries that we need for calendars. The link to this is in the description down below. And the way that you would use this is that you would have to import it initially, and then all you have to do is just say locale and define which locale you're trying to look for. So in this case it's Russia. If you want Canada, it would be like CA, that type of stuff. Alright, after that we have the first day of the week prop. So in this case we can actually define if the first day of the week should either be a Sunday or Monday. So in this case it chose Sunday, so that's why they show Sunday right here. Awesome. After that we have the multiple months. This is honestly the funniest thing. I didn't really think that it would ever exist, but if you wanted, you can display a certain amount of months, and this will work for as many months as you want. I tried 123 months. From a user's perspective, it looks disgusting. From a fun perspective, it's incredibly fun. Alrighty, after that we have the label format. This will be able to display a format for our months if you wanted. So in this case we're doing month, month, year, year. So this would be 03/22 or March 2022. After that we have the min and max dates. This is pretty interesting. If we wanted to set a minimum date and a maximum date for a calendar, we can do that. So in this case they're doing day.js start of month, add 5 days. So in this case what they're doing is they're starting from here, they're adding 5 days, and the minimum date that the calendar can start on is after 5 days. So it would be the 6th, and the maximum date is the end of the month, which would be 31st, subtracted by 5, which would be the 26th. After that we can also exclude certain dates that we want by using the exclude date prop, and in this case they're excluding if the date is 0 or 6. Now after all that, you're probably wanting to look at the use customize styles API. So we're actually able to customize our calendar pretty openly, and so in this case all of these styles where we can edit the cell, the day, the weekday cell, we can give it certain styles that we want. So in this case, if we were to copy all of these styles and we paste it into our own calendar, our calendar will look something like this right here. Alright, now let's go ahead and actually work with this. Alright, so I've opened up the app that we've been building in the past couple of videos, and the very first thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is in my components file folder, I'm going to create a new file called calendarexample.tsx, and I'm going to open up the input example, and I'll just copy whatever content is on the side of here, and I'll paste it here, and I'll change the name to be calendar example. And now inside of my AppShell, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this piece of text right here inside of my AppShell, and I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to take it to a page called calendar page, and I'll make the link called calendar page, scrolling down all the way to the bottom where our routes are. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, I'll paste it once, and we're going to calendar page, and the element is going to be calendar, whoops, not calendar header, but calendar example, like so. Now let's go ahead and check out our app, go to calendar page. Perfect, now we're displaying the input stuff, which is fine. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my app, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out all of this content since we don't need any of it. I'm going to scroll to the top, and I'll get rid of this as well. And the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import a calendar from Mantine dates, like so. And if I go back into the app, we'll see a basic out-of-the-box calendar right here, month March. We can select a date. We can't select a date. We will add that functionality later. So now very first thing, let's go ahead and let's have a little bit of a goof and a gaff here. If I were to do amount of months, this is where we can define the amount of month of calendars that we want. So let's add 2. And if I go back into the app, we'll see 2 calendars right here. We can't select any dates. We didn't add that functionality. Don't worry about that. We'll add that soon. Now let's go really crazy. It's at 223 calendars. And if I refresh the page, my computer is just fast enough to handle 223. After 223, my computer crashes. So right here we have 223 worth of months in calendars, all the way up to September 2040. Alright, so now let's go ahead and actually talk about how to actually select a date and see what kind of console log they will give us. So what I'm going to do firstly is get rid of this amount of dates, and we'll just have like 2 months max because I don't want to break my computer. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll do a on change, and I'll do a value, and above everything I'll create a const calendar val and set calendar val, and we'll do use state, and we're going to set this use state to actually be new date. Inside of the documentation, I know it says null, but null doesn't actually work. It's weird. But so let's go ahead and add our set calendar val on our on change and our calendar val on our value, and I'll just add a quick use effect where we will just console log calendar value, and let's see what that gives us. So we'll do console.log calendar val, and if I go back into the app and I open up my inspect tool, we see Saturday, March the 5th, our time, GMT, and everything like that. Alright, now let's add some localization into our app. So remember this JSON file, the link to this is in the description down below. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this import, and I'll put it into my app. Now we're not going to import the Russian one, we will actually do Ukrainian, and that is UK. Hang on, wait, England, what is England? United Kingdom. Oh, it's ENGB. Ah, interesting. I thought the UK would be United Kingdom, but alright. So UK send with Ukraine, and down here if I do locale is equal to UK, and I go into the app, now we should see a Ukrainian calendar for both of our calendars with the actual month and the days. Alright, now let's add a little bit of styling to our app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this styles prop right here, and I'll paste it into my calendar right here, like so. And let's go ahead and edit a little bit of this stuff. So if I go back into the app, we'll see how it actually looks like right now. We have 2 calendars, they look substantially different than out of the box. Now this is really cool. If we go into the documentation, there's a tab called Styles API, and we scroll a little bit down, we can actually see all of the Styles API names that we can apply to our styles. So in this case, we can do apply styles for cell or day, outside, weekend, all that stuff. So if I go back into the app, we're using some of these things right here right now. So we're using weekday, sell, day. And since we're in dark mode, we can actually control what kind of color we want the actual calendar to look like. So I'll do theme.colors.red index 3, and instead of gray, we'll do blue at 4. Now if I go back into the app, we should see in dark mode we have our red outline in our cells, and if I do light mode, we have our blue cells. Alrighty, now before I end this tutorial, I'm going to walk you guys through how to use the range calendar component in the library. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my app, and underneath my current calendar, I'll import range calendar from Mantine dates. It requires 2 props, on change and value. And at the very top, I'm going to go ahead and import these props. So I'll create a new use state variable. I'll call it range val and set range val. Oops, there we go. And I'll do a use state. This use state requires us to actually define the type. So I'll do date. Oops, in an array block, I'll do date and date. And I'll do new date, and I'll do new date, like so. And down here I'll specify the actual date, so I'll do range val, oops, not range val, set range val for our on change, set range val and range val. Alright, the reason it's yelling at us is because we forgot to add the array blocks inside of the actual use state. So I'll do array block there and 1 there. And now if I go back into the app, we should see a range calendar right here where we can define a range of dates. Now, before I end the tutorial, the last thing is I'll show you guys how to define an amount of calendars if you want it. So I'll do amount of month, and we'll do like 35. And so now I can select a date range from the 1st. This is going to be very slow because there's a lot of months, all the way to June 2024. And going to our inspect tool, we can see the dates that we selected. So March 1st all the way to June 21st of 2024. Awesome. Awesome, so that concludes this tutorial. Now you should have enough understanding of how to work with calendar and range calendar, how to style it as well. And in today's video, we're going to be learning about how to work with the time input and time range input components. This is what we're going to be building right here. It's incredibly styled 2 component inputs. The first one is our time input, where we're able to insert our time in a 12-hour format. So you can do either AM or PM. We have an icon that's colored. We have some background color for our input. We have a basic title and a basic description, and at the very bottom here we have a time range input where we're able to specify a certain time as well. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I've opened up the documentation for time input. The link to this is in the description down below. The very first thing that we can see right here is the usage tab. This is a simple time input where you actually have to manually put in the time that's available to you. In my opinion, this is a pretty solid component. If you compare it to something like the Material UIs, where you have a little clock that opens up, I would say that that one, from a user perspective, in my opinion, is a little bit better, but this gets the job done 100%. So in the usage tab, you have a simple label where we can add it right at the top right here. It says what time is it now, and we can input a time if we wanted. So we can do, if I go to the first one, we can do 23:04. Or we can do the 12-hour clock if we wanted. After that, we have the controlled prop right here. This allows us to be able to actually tell what time that the user selected. So we can use the value and on change, similar to how in the last video we talked about the calendar. This will tell us what the actual value of time the user selected. After that, we have the with seconds prop. This basically just adds a with seconds. So if we wanted a specific time, 4:30:59 seconds, we're able to do that with this prop. After that is a 12-hour format. This is the format that a lot of people in North America, not too sure about South America, are used to. The 12-hour clock, so it goes from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. instead of 24 hours, which to me doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. So we can easily be able to put in our time. So we can't put in 23. It goes up to a maximum of 12 and up to 60 minutes. After that, we have the input props. Inside of here, we can actually make a live time input if you wanted. We can have a label, our description if we wanted, an error if something is wrong, the different types of variants. So we have default, filled, and unstyled. If we wanted a radius or no radius, different sizing, what kind of formats we want, 12 hours or 24, width second, to make it disabled or not, to make it clearable or not. And so below this live usage, we have our code if we wanted to use it. After that, we have the width icon. We're able to actually display an icon inside of our time input if we wanted. In this case, they're using the clock icon right here on the left side. After that, we have the invalid state and error. So let's say we wanted to display an error or something that's invalid, and the user, let's say we wanted the user to only select a time between 2:30 and 4:30, but they selected something like 6. We want to display an error, and we're able to do that with this prop right here. After that, we have the disabled state. This is pretty self-explanatory. You can't actually edit the time input when it's disabled. After that, we have the input ref, and this is really cool. I've never seen this before. Is you're actually able to provide hours, minutes, seconds labels to make input visible to screen readers. And if we scroll at the very top, we have our component props and styles API. Inside the component props, we're able to select what kind of props we want to target, the type, and the description of each of these props. And there's a lot of them. We're not going to cover every single one of them, but we will be using some of them. After that, we have the styles API. This is really cool. There's a lot of styles you can apply to this throughout the actual out of the box. And you have the name, the static selector, and the description of what each of these items are. And you have an example right here of every single thing basically colored as red. Now, before we do get our hands dirty with time inputs, I want to talk about time range input. This is really similar to the calendar range input, where you're able to just select in this case, a time input between two ranges. Right now what this is doing is taking the current, my current time, and displaying it inside of this input right here. It has a label and it has a value on change, as well as a clearable X right there. You can see how it is if it was empty. After that, we have the width seconds. Same thing, it just has seconds applied to it. After that, we have the actual time range props, and time range component uses the same props as time input component, with the difference in value, on change, and default value, with some additional props like label separator. And if we go to the very bottom, again, this is really cool. We're actually able to provide hours, minutes, and seconds labels to make inputs visible to screen readers. Now let's go ahead and actually work with these two components. So I've opened up the app that we've been building in the last couple of videos in this series, and this is the calendar example. The link to this is in the description below if you want to check it out. The first thing I want to do is we're just going to set up our route for our time input example. So I'll create a new file inside of my components folder. I'll call it time input example.tsx, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy my calendar example and paste it into here just so we have some basic code, and I'll change the name to be time input example like so, and I'm going to save it inside of my AppShell. I'll copy this route and I'll call it, we're going to direct it to a path of time input page, and the element is time input example like so. Go to the very top right here inside of our nav links. I'm going to copy this last nav link, paste it, and it's going to direct to time input page, and the actual text will be time input page. And if we go into our app, we should see our time input page right here, and it's just the exact same calendar page. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and mess around with the time input components. Alright, now I'm back in the app, and what I'm going to do is go into my time input example, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out all this information since we don't need any of it. I get rid of this right here as well as this. I'll leave the use effect there since we can test out our values that are being changed. And what I'm going to do is firstly make a const time input and set time input is equal to use state, and let's just do new date like that. Now if I go down, what I'll do is inside of here I'll make the time input and I'll import it from Mantine dates. I'll give it a value equal to time input, and on change we want to change it to be set time input. Basically, initially what will happen is it'll display the new date value, which is my current time, and on change it'll show set time input. So just so that we can actually see some data being changed, I'll do console.log time input. Now let's go back into our app. And very first thing, let me zoom in a little bit. We'll see right here we have 1911. I think that's 711. If I go to my console, we should see, oops, if I change this, we can see our time being changed right there. So we have 1952. Oh, whoops, I just realized I was just typing in more numbers and it maxes out at 59 seconds. So I'll put in 1 here and we can see the time change right there. Let me make this a little bit, whoops, let me make this a little bit bigger. So we see right here it's 1:01:52. So we'll do 3 at 4, and if I get out of it, we'll see 3:4:52. Alright, now let's add a little bit of styling to this. So what I'm going to do is go back to my app, and I will do icon, and since we're absolutely crazy, I'm going to put in the weirdest icon ever, since we're absolutely insane. GitHub logo icon. And you can see a GitHub logo icon. Alright, now let's add a little bit of styling to this because this is looking really basic. So if we go back into the documentation, I'm in the styles API of time input, and I scroll down, we can see all of the actual types of selectors that we can select from. And here's an example of them using each of them to color everything red. So if I go back into the app, what I'll do is I'll do styles, curly braces, smooth curly braces, theme, arrow function, smooth curly, really curly. I feel like I'm losing all credibility when I say smooth curly and really curly. But let's say we want to edit the icon, the GitHub icon's color. So all I have to do is icon, curly braces. I'll do like color. Let's say we'll make it theme dot colors dot. Let's be crazy here, since it's not the actual GitHub icon logo. We'll do orange at the 7th index, and if we look at it, oh my goodness, it's orange at the 7th index. I'm trying to zoom in, it won't let me zoom in. Hang on, there we go. We can see it's orange at the 7th index. Now just for a little bit more styling, what I'll do is we'll edit the actual color of this text field right here. So to do that, all we have to do is you have to call the I think it's called filled variant, since that's the one that we're using, and I'll give it a background color of let's do theme dot colors, oops, not color scheme, colors dot blue at the 5th index. Let's see how that looks. Whoa, that looks disgustingly amazing. Now let's quickly add a description and a label for these time input. It's really simple. All you have to do is, oops, label, this is our title basically. This is a, whoops, this is a label. And if you want a description, all you have to do is description is equal to, this is a description. You can add whatever you want in the text field. So if I go into it, we'll see a, whoops. If I go into it, we'll see a label, a title, and a description. Now let me show you guys how to work with the time range input. It's exactly the same as the calendar range input. You have to define 2 values, 2 different ranges initially. You can either have them as null or new date, whatever you want. In this case, what they're doing, they created 2 variables, now and then, where in now is equal to the current time, then is equal to the current time plus 30 minutes. And they have a label, same thing, value, on change, and a clearable option. So the way you actually use this, underneath my time input, I'll just do time range input and import it, and I'll do value, and I'll do on change. Alright, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and copy this useState variable as well as these 2 variables right here. And I'll paste it at the very top underneath my other useState, like so. Let's go ahead and import day.js. And let's put in our set value inside of the on change, and we'll put in value inside of our value prop right there. Now if I go into the app, alrighty, we have an error and it says it is not assignable to type date or null or date or null. We just need to actually define the type. So I'll scroll to the very top, and instead of use state, I'll make alligator braces, and I'll do an array block, and inside of there the first parameter will be a date and the other parameter will also be a date. So now if we go into our app, we'll see that it works. We have the current time as well as time 30 minutes from now. And the styling is the exact same thing. If I wanted to do, let's go back into the app. If I wanted to just go ahead and copy this style prop right here and paste it into my time range input, like so, we'll see that we have the exact same styles. Awesome, so that concludes this tutorial. And by now you should have a pretty good understanding of how to work with the time input and time range input components, how to add labels, description, and how to style it. We're almost done with the series, and in today's video we're going to be learning about how to work with the notification system at a high level, and we're going to make a quick project. Before we do get started, this video is a recommendation by this guy, John. This was a suggestion, and it was a pretty good suggestion that I thought that we should run over quickly. And so by the end of the tutorial, you have a high level understanding about this component, how to work with it, and we'll be making this pretty cool small project where we're making a simple Axios GET request to an API, to a NBA API, where when we click on the button, we'll see a notification, and then by the time it's completed, the data gets loaded, and then we actually see it right here. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alrighty, so I've opened up the documentation for the Mantine notifications, and if you scroll down, the very first thing we see here is that it asks us to install the packages, which is just notifications. We've already installed the core and hooks, so we don't need to worry about that. We won't install this right now, but we're just going to quickly run over the documentation before we do get started with the app. Alright, so after that we have a small demo of a few examples of the notifications that's available to us. The very first one is the default notification. It just says it's a default notification, and in the subtitle it says, "Hey, your code is pretty awesome." Not. I don't know why that's always reminding me like Borat, that one scene with the comedian guy. Anyway, so after that we have the teal with icon. So we have a check mark that we can close, a red color, a notification that doesn't close unless you actually click on the X, a 10-second timeout, and a loading and state update, like so right there. So after 3 seconds it goes from loading to complete. Alrighty, so the usage is pretty simple. In our index.tsx file, this is where we would put the notifications provider. So we just have to encapsulate our app with that provider, and that's it. And after that, if we want to use the actual hook at any place in the application, all we would have to do is this use notifications variable right here, and then on the click of a button we can call a notification, a specific notification, or either update, show, etc. And then we can give it a prop such as title, message, icon, that type of stuff. And after that we have the use notification hook. The hook returns an object with properties. So these are all of the items that we can actually associate with our use notifications function right here. So if we did like notifications, we can do show notifications, update, hide, clean queue, or queue, or notifications in itself. And after that, if we scroll a little bit lower, we'll see the actual props and what their types are. And underneath that we have the notification props. So we have the first one, ID. Notification ID is used to update and remove a notification. By default it is randomly generated. After that we have disallow close. This basically removes the close button or makes it appear. And so now notifications can only be closed programmatically, such as with a set timeout. After that we have the on close. This is when the notification is unmounted, and on open when it is mounted. Auto close, so defining a timeout where the notification will be closed after a certain amount of time. If we want to disable it, all we have to do is set it as false. After that, this is mandatory. This is the message field. This is basically to display that one message that we saw, that little Borat thing I was talking about earlier, where if I click this again, we see like, "Hey there, your code is awesome." Not. And then after that we have the color, icon, title, radius, class name, style, and loading. And these are all props that we can provide that is originally from the notification component right here. And right afterwards we see that there is a bare minimum, and this is just a message right here that says hello. And after that we have all the possible notification props from ID all the way to loading, and a little bit of styling and everything in between. After that we have a live example of how we can actually style our notifications. So we can either have it loading, disallow close, so you can see how the X goes away. We can add a little bit of styling to the icon if you want, have a huge amount of radius or no radius at all, change our title up, or change our description. After that, we have a container position. We're not going to be dealing with this at all in this tutorial. Afterward, we have a limit and queue. So this will allow us to actually limit a certain amount of maximum notification that can be displayed at one time. So in this case, I have 5. So if I were to click on this button right here, it would actually only show us 5 because that's what we've limited it to. So if I click it right now, it'll show 1, 2. Let me zoom out. Show 5 right here. 6. Every single time one is removed, it'll add another one, but keep it as a maximum of 5. And so after all this, we can see our clean queue and clean all handler in effect right here. So if I click on this show 10 notifications, we'll see our 5. But if I click on one and I remove one notification, we'll see another one pop up all the way up to 10. But if I were to click on clean queue, now all the other notifications from 7 to 10, they no longer exist. So if I click on number 2, it won't add another one. If I click on clean all, it'll just get rid of every single one that's even available anywhere. Alrighty, after that we have the update notification. This is something that we can use to be able to update a individual notification to display something else. So in this case, if I were to click on this show update notification, we'll see that it's loading. After 3 seconds, it will have loaded, and then after 2 seconds, it'll automatically close. And you can see that there's a distinct thing that the way that is working is that there's a const ID equal to the notification. So on the click of the button, it'll begin this, and then afterwards, after 3 seconds, it'll get rid of this, and then it will start this up. And then the way that it knows to actually remove this specific notification is through the actual ID itself. So this is mandatory if you want to update a previous notification. You can see right here, auto close on 2 seconds, and you want to remove this notification on 3 seconds. Alright, we're almost done. So we have this auto close right here. We can define it if we want to close all notifications at a certain point in our notification provider using auto close, and after 4,000 milliseconds, it will remove it. After that, we have if we want to use it in an individual use notification hook, we can provide it as a prop, or we can set it to never close. And after that, we have the show notification and update notification have higher priority. So we have examples of how that works. So we have a notification provider timeout. After 4 seconds, that closes. After 500 milliseconds, that closes. And this one will never close unless we actually click on the X. And finally, we have the React node in notification message. It says here you can render any React node in notification message. For example, input or button. Combine this option with other settings to achieve a desired behavior. So if we click on this, we see this little subscribe to newsletter. And we can click on this button and it'll send it on its way. And on that click, we can actually have it trigger a function that runs in our backend that actually collects these emails and does stuff, whatever stuff we want with it. Alrighty, I think that's enough about this whole documentation stuff. I scrolled to the very top of the docs, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this npm install package to install notifications into our app. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my VS Code. And what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and paste that command right there. And before we run it, I'm also going to install Axios into our app so we can have a quick, easy GET request to a NBA API. Next I'm going to do is in my components folder, I'm going to create a file called notifications example.tsx. And just so we have some content in there, I'll just go ahead in my input example. I'll just copy this code and I'll paste it into there, and I'll change the actual function name, so I'll call it notification example, and I'll save that. Let's get rid of this content so we don't need any of it, and I'll just type in test just so we have some stuff there. Let's get rid of this as well, and let's get rid of all of this. Perfect. Now let's go into our AppShell. At the very top here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this text for our link, and I'll change this to notification page, and same thing here, I'll get rid of this and I'll call it notification page, like so. Scrolling down here, I'm just going to copy this path. It's going to direct to notification page, and the element will be notification example, like so. And now if we go back into our app, we should see if I go into, oops, let's refresh. Right, we don't even have the app running. Let's go ahead and start that up. Alright, now we have the notification and it's all connected. Now before we begin, we need to actually contain our entire app in our notification provider, or else it just won't work. So this is how it's going to look. All you have to do is we have to import the notification provider from Mantine notifications, and then we just have to encapsulate the app like so. So here's our app and here's a provider. Alright, now I'm going to open up my notification example, and the very first thing that we have to do is we have to import all of our packages and use state and use effects. So the first thing I'll do is import our use state and use effect. So I'll do use effect and use state from React, and afterwards I'll do import button from @Mantine core. After that I'll do import use notifications from @Mantine core /notifications, and after that I'll do import Axios from Axios, and finally import a basic check icon from our @modules /radix icons. Perfect. Alright, now that we have everything imported, what we're going to do is we are going to call our use notifications hook. So to do that, I'll do const notifications is equal to use notifications, like so. And after that, I'll do const random player and set random player from, whoops, not from, I got imports in the mind right now. Use state, and I'll do first underscore name, which is going to be equal to an empty quote, like so. And after that, I'm going to create our simple get request from the API. So the const get player name, and we'll make a function call. And for this function call, I'll do axios.get, and the URL, let me just go ahead and copy it, will be https://baldonlie.io/API players 237, which gets us the best player of all time, LeBron James. Don't @ me. Then I'll do .then, which will do response, and with the response we will set our random player to be res.data, and after that we're going to actually set our notification. So when we actually want to display our notifications been successful, so once we got the actual data, we want to display notification. So I'll do notifications dot show notification, and the very first thing, the minimum thing that it needs, is a message. So for the message, I'll say we got your data, and for a title, I'll just say here's some data. And for a color, since it's a success message, it makes sense that we do green. And for an icon, we'll do the icon that we've imported, which is our check icon, like so. And after that, if I scroll to the very bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this test since we don't need it anymore, and I'll import a button tag. Whoops, a button from our Mantine core. What is going on? Button. I think it's this. There we go. And the button will say show data, and the button variant will be equal to outline, and on click we want to actually run our get player name function, and to display a notification that we're actually getting the data from the API. So first thing I'll do is notifications.show notification, and I'll do simple title that says we are getting your your data. I think that's more appropriate that if we have that as a message actually. So we'll do message instead, and we'll just leave it as that. We don't need any title. What is the issue here? Unexpected identifier. There we go. And finally, we're going to run our function in the on click. So I'll do random player. I think it's random. Oh, it's get player name. Whoops. There we go. And so now, if we test it out in our app, we should see a show data function. Oh, hang on, let me just throttle the internet a little bit so that we actually see that we see an initial notification and then our success notification. So if I click this button, we see our initial notification. We're getting your data, and here's some data, but we're not seeing data because I sort of forgot to display the data. So to do that, underneath my button, I'll just do random player dot first name. And so if I refresh the page, it might take a little bit of time because it's on slow 3G right now. Oh man, it's really slow. Let me add no throttling. There we go. All right, so now if we go back on slow 3G and I click on show data, we're getting your data, and then perfect. Here's some data. We got your data, a success icon, and we have the greatest of all time. Awesome. So that concludes this tutorial. By now you should have a pretty good understanding of how to work with the notification system, but I'd highly recommend you go through the documentation and you try it out a little bit more yourself. The best way to learn is through practice and through getting your hands dirty with the actual stuff. Alrighty, so that concludes this one compilation video for Mantine. If you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you want to see anything different in regards to these longer type of videos, be sure to let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.